Welcome to the Rajant broadcast, implementing a cybersecurity strategy in the oil and gas business. We have a lot of people who are still trying to join, so we're going to hold off on just a minute or so to get started, but please stay on the line. We'll be started soon. Hello, this is Judy Murray with Upstream. Welcome to today's webcast, Implementing a Cybersecurity Strategy in the Oil and Gas Business, sponsored by Rajant. This webcast builds on last week's webinar, IIoT 4.0 for the oil field, a new norm, which addressed how to make smart fields smarter with IIoT technology. If you missed the earlier webinar, you aren't too late to see it. You can find it on upstreamonline.com. Today, with the help of our expert presenter, Rivero, Director for Oil and Gas at Rajant, we're going to learn how having a robust cybersecurity strategy helps owners and operators protect assets and crew and safeguard against interruptions to exploration, drilling, and production. Al is going to explain not only why having a cybersecurity strategy is important, but also how the strategy should be managed. Before I hand things over to Al, though, I want to tell you a little bit about Rajant Corp in case you're not already familiar with them. Rajant was founded in October 2001 and is headquartered in Pennsylvania. It is an exclusive provider of peer-to-peer private kinetic mesh networks consisting of breadcrumb wireless nodes powered by its patented InstaMesh networking software. Rajant has hundreds of installations to its credit for the military and across industry sectors, including mining, oil and gas, agriculture, transportation, shipping, petrochemical, and manufacturing, in addition to municipalities and federal and state governments. Combined, this constitutes more than 40,000 network nodes operating in a variety of private networks. Now, I know you want to hear Al's presentation, so I'll just share a couple of things about participating in today's webinar and let him get started. First, you can submit questions at any time by clicking on the Ask a Question area, typing your question, and clicking the Submit button. After the presentation, Al will answer as many questions as time allows. If you do not have your question answered, it doesn't mean it won't be answered. You'll get an answer by email if you've posed a question in the box. So just a couple of housekeeping notes. If you're running pop-up blocking software, please disable it. And we recommend that you close all other applications for the best system performance. For your convenience, this presentation will be available on demand within a week of today's live event. And a reminder email will come out to you with a link so you'll know when it's available. The webinar will also be accessible from the homepage at upstreamonline.com. Now, finally, we're done with all the preamble, and it gives me great pleasure to turn the webcast over to Al.
Good morning, and thank you, Judy. One of the things we want to jump right into, just from a time constraint, is why we need to implement a cybersecurity solution and what things we need from an infrastructure standpoint to make things happen. What's been going on over the last 20 years since we transitioned more into an IT space with common operating systems, common solutions, is the ever-increasing vulnerability to our IT infrastructure. If you were on the call last week, we talked a lot about doing more with the same architecture. And one of the things we want to exploit this week is how to do more in a secure way with that architecture. And this is something that makes Rajant very different. Our breadcrumbs are designed from the ground up with security in mind. And so we'll talk about that, and we'll talk about what makes things different and what the vulnerabilities are. When you look at where the vulnerabilities are coming from in a typical infrastructure, whether it's a chemical plant, refinery, E&P production facility, the majority of it are coming from very sophisticated hackers. Anyone today can be a hacker. It's unfortunately really easy to get on a website and download software, make some modifications to it, and voila, you are a hacker. So the increasing vulnerability is definitely there. Those level of hacks, I call it high school level hacks, are easy to perpetrate and can be done by just about anybody with little to no insider knowledge. And those typically occur on lower, less sophisticated infrastructure. The more sophisticated the infrastructure is, then you start getting into nation states, you start getting into industrial espionage, and just disruption of service or destruction of equipment. If you look at the statistics, critical manufacturing and energy kind of take the lead at attempted hacks or successful hacks. And the reason for that is, for a sophisticated hacker or someone that wants to exploit an industry, the name recognition of the target is really what they're looking for. They're looking for a high-profile target, someone that gives them notoriety and claim to fame. You don't see too many in the healthcare. You don't see too many in government facilities, although you are seeing more. You're seeing more in transportation and water, wastewater. But for the most part, is critical manufacturing and energy. The other thing, too, in critical manufacturing, things haven't evolved to adapt some of the cybersecurity standards for control systems as quickly as in other industries. So then you ask, why do we need to do this? There's a lot of reasons to do it. And I'll start off with, segregating and segmenting your infrastructure is really important for a lot of reasons. And we'll explain more as we go down deeper into why and then how. But a lot of it is reliability. The critical thing that as an instrumentation or an automation engineer, our responsibility is to make sure whatever we're doing is operating reliably and safely. And whether it's a bottling plant or a petrochemical plant, reliability and safety are the utmost things when we do a system design. And as we talked last week, having access to that information is becoming ever more important. The demands on having real-time information in the IT infrastructure is becoming more important to run software, optimize the plants, and look at those things. And the last reason we want, and the most important one, is we don't want front-page notable events under our watch. So implementing a critical, secure environment is of the utmost importance. Then the other thing, your reputation's impacted. You lose your trust with the community or the partners you're working with because you have an outage or something occurs in your system. And then, it impacts your internet breach insurance, your liability insurance if you have an incident. There's a lot of nuances that impact the overall infrastructure and how you're using it. The other thing I wanted to say is, and it's becoming more complex today. When you look at the layers of security and the layers of infrastructure, it is a lot more complex than it was 20, 30 years ago. When you look at what's going on, I'm going to set a little time here. 70% of all vulnerabilities are deep within the control system network, and they require existing access to the control system to exploit it. An example of that was a fairly well-known incident that occurred March of 2000 in Queensland, Australia, the Maroochy water plant. An insider took over the network infrastructure, caused a pump to fail, and filled up a parking lot for a mall with sewage water. That is fundamentally, a big exploit that impacts really that whole insider threat, and we'll talk about that. And there's others, like the Turkey pipeline explosion in 2008 was attributed to cyber intrusion. The Baku Saham oil pipeline exploded, and everybody that was involved in it looked at it as, someone hacked into the system for nefarious reasons. The other, about 9% of what's going on in the system are typically the advisories applied to products generally associated are with the enterprise, not necessarily the operation. So people tend to ignore them. And sometimes the manufacturers themselves don't want you to put those patches on the systems. When you look at what's out there, 26% of the advisories had no patches at all available when the initial advisory came out. That represents a challenge to the users of the system. A good example of that would be NightDragon. When that came out, none of the manufacturers actually put in a release for their product till maybe 2010, and it was released in November of 2009, and that impacted a lot of systems in oil and gas, energy, petrochemical plants, all over the industry. Once it was finally released, NightDragon 2 came out, which impacted and targeted servers specifically. So you look at, what's going on in the system, and are we responding fast enough? And my personal philosophy is that I don't think we can ever respond fast enough. We just got to design a system with security in place from the beginning. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. The other thing that's occurring is roughly 30% of all published advisories rely on incorrect data, which is fundamentally an issue, I think. And part of it is because the folks that are doing the virus patches and those things aren't getting the real data to what's actually happened. A good example is in Hungary, 2011, the Duku flame incident. And you look at that, and that was almost a precursor to, or a follow-up on Stuxnet, which happened in 2010. So you look at all these things happen all over the world, and I can go on all the way up to things that occurred last year, and there's a bunch of incidents that help in the justification of a good cyber strategy for control systems. So when we look at what we want to do, we're going to look at how to protect the system from the core and going out. You look at developing a multi-layer architecture and access control system. We've talked about a lot of the incidents occur because of this disgruntled insider that had intimate knowledge of the system. 77% of the hacks that occurred, as we talked in the previous slide, were done by someone with aggressive knowledge of the system. What a lot of companies are doing these days is segregating roles within the system so that multiple people have knowledge of different aspects of the systems. If you're looking at implementing a mesh solution within the architecture, what we tell the clients is always good to have an administrator that understands the architecture and the solution, but it's also good to have someone separate that has knowledge of the cryptography and the cryptography settings. And actually within our system, we keep those separate. If you're a sysadmin, you have one set of roles. If you're a cryptography officer, you have a different set of roles, and you manage the encryption of the system. And understanding how to set that up is really important and what layers you're going to deploy. When you're looking at multiple layers, it also is important to look at understanding that it's a cyber physical component. So you got to have a physical security aspect to what you're doing. So that means controlling access to who has access to the server rooms, access to the control centers, access to the HMIs, even access to the plants. And looking at those access controls on a regular basis, making sure that if Joe got terminated, that his access is terminated. A lot of times, like in the Marucci incident, the individual was terminated and his access was still active. It was still active like 3 months after he left. And when you look at if they had terminated the access or changed the passwords upon termination, that would have never occurred. And so things as simple as that help prevent an incident that we're still talking about almost 19 years later. So looking at your roles and responsibilities internally, no matter what your infrastructure is really important. And then a clear understanding of today, as well as a clear understanding of where you're going to go. When you're looking at security policies and implementing them, understanding where you're at today and what the roles are going to be today is really important because that defines your baseline architecture for where you're going to go. Looking at where you're going to go tomorrow helps you identify as the system grows what layers you're going to maintain. You got to remember the onion starts to rot from the outside in, and the harder you hit it, the softer the layers become, and you start peeling that onion and keep peeling it till you get to the core of the onion where hopefully it's still solid. And that's what you want to do is you want to create a hard center with kind of that soft, gooey, chewy outside that you can start layering off as things occur. That helps you in a lot of ways. It helps you as things are going normal, but in the event of an incident, you know the layers and you know what to turn off and you know who to respond and you know what people can act on those. The other thing is, and it's mind-boggling still today to me, that a lot of people don't have a good handle on just all the traffic that's on their network, all their applications, the different types of telemetry, and how those things are involved in the day-to-day. About a year ago, I was doing some work with a client trying to understand their architecture. And in this particular case, the internet router into the company averaged about 35,000 attempts a day. Now, the external IP router was fairly successful in blocking those, and they felt very comfortable in the control system that they had it completely secured through a DMZ and all those things in place. So they were baffled at how things occurred and how their system got contaminated. And it really ended up being an internal policy issue. One of the controllers who liked to listen to music brought in a USB stick with his favorite music on it and plugged it into the console. And that USB stick was contaminated, and it created a backwards hole through the routers, which allowed outside entities to gain access to the information within the system. Now, fortunately, there was nothing that impacted the operation other than it slowed down a lot of the operations because they were just funneling the data out. But they got all the operating parameters, they got all the variables and all the information from the system. So when I talk about policies, I talk about things that we do internally with our people, our staff, as well as our cybersecurity systems. And again, I'm going to reinforce that it's really, really important to create those layers of protection as you go forward. When you look at the architecture we've created at Rajant, it's really important to note that what we've done internally is built the encryption not as an add-on, but as part of the solution. When you do that, you gain a lot of momentum in not only the culture of the company, but in the products and how they're laid out. So implementing encryption from the floor up is fairly simple to do. Implementing things like secure boot, since you've already set up the infrastructure to create that type of environment, and it's built with security in mind from the ground up, and it's not a bolt-on, those things become part of the culture. And it becomes part of the manufacturing culture, and it becomes part of the culture of our ecosystem partners as well as our end users. So understanding that this is not a bolt-on, it's part of our ingrained culture. And a lot of it comes from our military background. You got to look that the majority of our infrastructure was originally designed around the military. Our cryptography solutions, primarily for DoD applications, are embedded in our commercial products. And those things become part of your ecosystem as you're moving forward. Very, very important when you're looking at what to do. A lot of people are afraid of implementing wireless solutions. And truthfully, I can't blame them. A lot of the wireless solution providers that are out there, security really was an afterthought. It's not ingrained in their culture. It's not ingrained as part of their overall solution. It really was an afterthought. Even the typical Wi-Fi AP, a lot of the security ends up being an add-on as they migrate to the next level or the next standard or something occurred. With the Rajant breadcrumbs, that security is literally embedded in our history, in our DNA from the ground up. You can talk to any employee or any partner that we have in our ecosystem, and they will all tell you the same thing, that is just part of the core. When you look at how our cryptography operates, it's inline, it's scalable, it's high speed. It's not like the other encryption solutions. And I've worked on a couple of standards where we really struggled. Those of you that can remember the ISA 99 standard when we started looking that out. And it was really, no one had encryption at the time. And the latency that the encryption modules added was not workable for a real-time solution. And eventually those solutions died and went to, different types of solutions. But one of the things that you look at when the system is designed with the methodology from the ground up, those things become scalable, provide very low latency, and provide a very secure communication path from beginning to end. We talk about every packet matters. Well, every packet matters delivered securely and reliably. So that is the key, that you want to make sure that there's no way You have a man in the middle attack. You have someone that doesn't have the correct credentials actually logging into your system and making changes. So we feel very comfortable that we've created a very robust product, but we also need our customers to implement fairly robust people solutions as well. We have the ability to provide wireless secure program updates. So any breadcrumb on the mesh can receive firmware updates wirelessly. You can do scheduled reboots. It really helps out with patch management and those kind of things as you move forward. All the data is configurable, and even the MAC layer and the MAC addresses are encrypted. One of the things that you can do with our system, if security is really, really critical, is per hop, per packet authentication, which means basically that each packet, each hop, the encryption key changes. That adds latency, of course, but that's also doable within the architecture. We also have the ability for you to add a programmable crypto module to the solution. This enhances the overall experience from a security standpoint. If you have a really, really critical solution and you need to implement very high-end security, we have the ability to do that. And we enable full ICS compliant. Your system can be encrypted, all the devices authenticated, secure boot, secure configuration, and event logging allows you full ICS compliant in your architecture. So when you look at what we've been talking about, you truly can implement a solution from the ground up or exploit an existing installation to have it do more things if you're running on a Rajant infrastructure. By implementing the use of VLANs, each VLAN can completely be segmented from the other. You can have one VLAN securely doing radius server authentication, while another one is doing polling for your field data or your information. And another one can be running a CCTV or access control system for entry into the facility, all within the same architecture, leveraging the same infrastructure. You don't need to buy different components. It's one architecture cleanly deployed across the entire infrastructure. If you want to step out from using our Kinetic Mesh Network, a lot of the features within the Kinetic Mesh Network also work as a wireless AP. Any one of our breadcrumbs can be a wireless AP, and you can implement all the different security measures and encryption that's available to you on the system. It's really important that what we get across is that it's one completely autonomous system that can be used for multiple things. The system has the ability for self-healing, for navigating around noise, for navigating around intrusions. And if one node fails, you still have the ability and resiliency to continue communications. That's what makes us very unique and very different. And then we have within the mesh product a whole host of alphabet soup encryption, everything from AES, HMAC encryption, SALSA, different levels, B Suite, AES encryption. All those are available in every one of our breadcrumbs across the product line. And when you look at what this particular infrastructure provides you through our partners, and one of the things is our partners can provide consulting for system architectures, can provide, that ability to transform your organization into a more high performance, high value added. And when you look at all these things, I like to use the lock on the end because it helps you recover, protect, and make you aware of what's going on. If you look from the left to the right, it's really about public trust, evaluating incidents, looking at your infrastructure and detecting threats. And on the right, it's really about once you know what you have, how you've implemented it, both the physical and the cyber, it helps you respond and prevent. Restoration of the system, guidance and coordination with other departments. It does not delay the destruction of the virus or whatever is doing, and it helps you eliminate the threat quicker. And all those things are done really by making sure you have access control, you can evaluate the vulnerabilities, you have a solid plan in place for doing today and for tomorrow. Really, as a solution provider, what we want to do is we want to future-proof your architecture. We want to make sure that you become a trusted partner with us in the ICS space. We understand that this type of infrastructure, you're not going to buy for 3 years and refresh it like a typical IT infrastructure. When you do automation in a plant or a production environment or manufacturing environment, typically those systems are in there for many years. And as a solution provider through our ecosystem, we want to make sure we're in there for you for many years to come. With that, I will take any questions from the audience, and if for some reason I can't answer any of the questions, we will get back to you and address those as we go forward.
Okay, so now that everybody has a better understanding of how cybersecurity systems work, you probably have some questions about how they deliver value for you. So if you have questions that are particular to your company, feel free to ask them. If you have general questions, ask them. So if you haven't sent your questions in, you can do it now. Just click on the Ask a Question area of the screen and type your question and then hit the Submit button. I'll go ahead and get started with the questions we've already had come in. Can you explain what some of the first steps are in determining a company's biggest cybersecurity threats?
That's really a good question. A lot of it, depends on the size of the company, the name recognition of the company, and the exposure the company has to the public eye. If you're out in the hacking domain, you're going to want to make a name for yourself. And a lot of these guys, as thick as they may be, really their target is to find a noteworthy adversary that they can create some discomfort with or potentially even an outage with. So the bigger your public profile and public image is, the higher your exposure and the more due diligence you have to have at implementing a solution. There are some companies that have a large profile that do a really good job at the cyber physical security aspect of their critical infrastructure protection. There's some that have advanced quite a bit in the last 5 years. Having been in this space for a long time, you look at the evolution of where these companies have come, where the journey has occurred for them. One of the things that I would say is look at, for whoever's asking this question, look at your specific industry. Whether you're in oil and gas, electric, water, wastewater, or discrete manufacturing, every one of those industries has implemented some kind of performance-based cybersecurity response or cybersecurity guidelines. In Europe, the European Union has a standard that they developed for critical infrastructure. In North America, the Department of Energy and DHS have some guidelines, even purchasing guidelines for when you're looking at implementing a new system. There's a lot of tools. I would say 90% of every one of those standards are in common. There's probably a 10% nuance to the specific industry sector or industry vertical because the applications are different. The type of things you're going to do in a refinery or a petrochem plant are going to be different than you're going to do in a local distribution company that's delivering gas, electricity to a residential or commercial park. So those are the fundamental nuances between the different standards. You have INGA, API, NERC, and just a whole alphabet soup of organizations that have sector-specific standards that can help you in implementing those, or reach out to one of our ecosystem partners if you have questions, or you can feel free to reach out to me if I can help you. We have a group of very talented sales engineers that can work with our ecosystem partners to help you out.
We have a listener who has a very specific question. He says, in an oil and gas plant, if there's the communication ICS.
I apologize. You're breaking up. I can't hear you very well.
Okay. This question's about.
Hey, Judy, you're still breaking up. So, Al, the question was, in an oil and gas plant, if there is a package UCP with a package PLC communicating with the plant ICSS, what cybersecurity measures apply to UCP/PLC?
So the programmable logic controller, the PLC in this case, you're going to have a different set of standards will apply. In our case, we provide a pipe and provide a secure pipe for that communication to transport through. Whether you're running, it doesn't really matter what protocol you're running at this point, right? You need to look at the application from the standpoint. From the control and process system, if you look at the packages from the UCP to the PLC or the entire ICS within the plant, securely, you can manage that fairly cleanly, and that pipe becomes, whether it's, I don't want to name any product manufacturers, but it doesn't really matter what type of PLC you're using. It gets a little more complicated if you're using a triple redundant or architecture or something like that, and we can kind of take that offline. But a normal, let's say, infrastructure PLC, I'll take a simple one that is, let's say, a conveyor belt for a coker plant or a crusher or compressor start or something like that. Those are fairly straightforward solutions. Where it gets a little more complicated is if you're looking at a cogeneration plant or something like that, how you're going to manage the security for those. But in a typical conveyor system, you have miles and miles of conveyor systems moving petroleum coke from the plant itself out to a crusher, out to loading and unloading operations, whether they be barge or truck. Those basically you end up doing is providing hardwire system or a wireless solution. If you provide a hardwire solution, you end up having a lot of issues with the festoons that run back and forth along the tracks. If you provide a wireless solution, then you got to make sure that the antenna placement and the profile of the system that you're including in the installation is classified, whether it's ATEX Zone 0, ATEX Zone 1, or ATEX Zone 2. Petroleum crusher, in most cases, is going to be Zone 1. All those things are in play. And along the conveyor cell system, you can have all the sensors, whether it's conveyor belt speed, all those things go back to the PLC. You have a different PLC on the crusher. You have a different PLC on the loading system, different PLC on the hoppers and a different one on the crane. And all those can be interconnected through a wireless mesh securely and can communicate. That eliminates a lot of issues that are currently in play in that type of architecture. And if you have other examples, we can take those offline, because this is where I really like to chat, and we can chat for a long time around the different variety of systems. There really is no one solution. Every plant's a little unique. Every architecture is going to be a little bit different as you deploy it. The one I use is probably, I would say, the most simplistic in an oil and gas plant. And there's probably others, water, wastewater plants that are fairly straightforward, outfalls and those kind of things. So I don't know who asked that question, but I'll look at all the questions afterwards, and I'll respond in a little more detail. And if you want to get back with me, my contact information is on the presentation, or you can reach out and we'll make sure you get all the details you need.
Okay, Al, another person is asking if Rajant has worked in India and in what applications, and where else in the world Rajant has installed cybersecurity systems.
Every one of our installations has some cybersecurity component associated with it. Most of our systems run AES 256 or some level of encryption on them. Our wireless products are currently not usable in India, as we don't have the frequencies available currently today, but we're working on that. We had a discussion a couple of weeks ago about making sure we had the free licensing available that India needs to make that happen. Chris, if you remind me who asked this question, I'll provide all the details for them on what we're doing around that.
Okay, so there are a lot of cybersecurity systems on the market, which makes it really hard to make comparisons in terms of end user value. So this person wants to know what makes Rajant software and solutions different.
So we do not offer IPS systems, or we do not offer specific router configuration type environment. What we have is every one of our breadcrumbs is capable of providing the end user a robust layer 2 architecture that's capable of whitelisting or blacklisting, that's capable of doing things that a traditional mesh network's typically not able to do, as well as run a fairly secure Wi-Fi architecture. We take great steps in providing that natively out of the box. What I want to make sure is that when you're looking at an ICS system, we are not the ones that are going to implement a DMZ, for example. But we can work with our ecosystem partners to make sure that an appropriate DMZ is designed and that we can layer on our layer 2 devices and simplify the network architecture as you move forward. One of the things that happens is when people try to do wireless networks, most of the wireless network systems that are available today are layer 3 and don't function well in a layer 2 environment. Well, that's key fundamentally to us. We can operate in both. We can simplify the installation. We have a lot of clients that have actually, once they learn of us, actually eliminate some of the hardware required in their architecture because it's no longer required. We can do a lot of the things that typically it'll take two, maybe 3 different devices, and you can do them with one. We have a couple of references in the U.S. that can talk about doing that and how successful, and I'm sure we can find some in Europe and Asia that have done that as well. Maybe
Okay,
time
Al,
for
here's
two
a
more
question
questions, Judy.
okay. So you talked about internal threats to cybersecurity, and I'm wondering if you can share just some really simple steps you can suggest for minimizing vulnerabilities that companies can take as they prepare for implementing a broader cybersecurity system. If you can answer that question, they'd be appreciated.
Sure. So third party or internal threats have always been an issue in ICS control. In most cases, the older systems were actually disconnected from the rest of the world, and the only way to gain access was through a knowledgeable insider that can create those threats. In today's systems, they're a little more interconnected and rely a lot on the internet to get patches and updates. What I recommend when I work with clients is really vetting of the employees, and some of the cybersecurity standards for different industries actually require background checks. If you're in Europe or in the US, a lot of the different infrastructures literally require periodic background checks of staff. Some companies do it differently. Also contractors that have access to the system, those kind of things. But the best way to do it really is, those things are more on the procedural standpoint, is looking at your architecture and segregate roles as best you can so that not one person has a complete and thorough understanding of everything. And then the easiest thing you can do is when somebody resigns or is terminated specifically, change the passwords, change and delete their access. That is fundamentally probably the easiest and cheapest thing any company can do to protect from insider threat. Last year, there was, I think, across the globe, over 900 incidents that took place, according to the Dragos Institute. And those occurred in critical infrastructure or control systems. When you look at 70+% of those are occurring because of an insider or a disgruntled insider. That's kind of startling that we still have that going on today. And fundamentally, those are in my mind, they're fairly straightforward to eliminate and reduce. So when you look at what you're doing today, I think there's some really quick and easy things you can do to eliminate that.
Right, here's a very straightforward.
Okay.
A very straightforward question is, this listener wants to know if you can name some companies in Europe that are using Rajant systems.
I cannot in a public forum.
I'm thinking maybe if you can tell them maybe some of the types of companies instead, Al.
Everything from mining operators to port operators to test tracks, and in a more private forum, I can definitely and share a little more detail. But since this is a pretty open forum and we have NDAs with most of our partners and end users, not really at liberty to expose who they are. But I can say there's hundreds of companies in Europe, Africa, Asia, Australia that are using our systems and are using them securely. It would really be not prudent of me to expose those companies at this time. We can do one more question.
Okay.
Judy,
yeah. All right. So I have another loaded question for you, Al. What is the typical cost to implement a cybersecurity system?
Oh, ouch. That varies. That varies a lot from architecture to architecture. So you're not going to get an actual answer on that one. You're going to get that it varies drastically. If you're implementing a solution for a chemical plant, it's going to be different than if you're implementing a solution for an underground mine or a test track or a snowboarding site or a warehouse. I think the best thing to do around that particular question is, have that individual reach out to one of our partners or reach out to one of our sales staff, and we can kind of give them a little bit better order of magnitude as to what it might look like to implement a solution within their framework. Even giving a ballpark order of magnitude is not even, because it ranges so much, and you have to understand, Judy, and the folks watching, that it really does vary drastically from installation to installation. So that's
well, I
the
did
answer.
say
I'm
that was going to be
it.
the last question, Al, but I kind of lied, because there's another here that I think is pretty straightforward too that you can probably answer in just a few seconds. But and we'll let this be the last one. Does Rajant provide guidelines that help companies implement cybersecurity programs?
We can help them implement a program for the control system, and we can work with the integration partners locally within your region to help you understand what needs to occur. So that's a pretty straightforward question. You're right. I mean, we can assist based on fundamentally what the systems should have and can do, and what the implication of different layers of security would add in cost to your system, not only in latency, but as well as infrastructure costs.
Okay, so I think that really is our last question. That's all we have time for to answer thoroughly during our event today. But if your questions haven't been answered, remember they will be answered by email. And as a reminder, the presentation you've just seen will be available on demand within a week of this live event, and will be available on the upstreamonline.com website. And every registrant will get a reminder email with a link. And for those of you who want to learn more, keep an eye out for an upcoming Rajant webinar that explains how to apply the company's industry-leading solutions in refineries and petrochemical facilities. So thank you all for joining us today.